So we come to word number 8. This principle deals with don't take things that don't belong to you. Word number 8. No stealing. The Hebrew word used here includes any kinds of taking. It's the word used for the taking of objects, just like Rachel took her father's household gods. She stole them, right, in the book of Genesis. It could refer to stealing someone's animals, like what Jacob says in the book of Genesis that he did not do with his father-in-law's flocks. It could also refer to just stealing someone altogether. In fact, this is the way that Joseph uses this word in the book of Genesis when he claims in Egypt that his brothers had stole him away, that they had sold him into slavery. Yet I don't think Yahweh is just referring to one of these aspects individually. I think it really is referring to all of them. It's a perspective that says part of my covenant commitment to Yahweh means that I respect the property of others. Of course, this gets at a core desire of humanity, the need for me to have something that doesn't belong to me. But I think this is one of those principles that really, if we're honest with ourselves, it kind of goes without saying, right? Surely the widespread use of this law throughout world history is something that can show us just how innate this is to human nature. Virtually every civil society worldwide has don't steal as one of the rules that governs their culture. Now, if we want to get ahead, it's possible then that we could start to take something that doesn't belong to us, right? And there's a temptation there. Instead of doing the hard work of laboring and saving for something expensive myself, well, I could just take it from somebody else and make it mine. But this is a very self-focused way to live. And it's easy to see how this would sow disorder and disunity within any community. So it's pretty straightforward. No stealing. Don't take something that doesn't belong to you. But how does this play out in the book of Deuteronomy? I think we see this paralleled in Deuteronomy chapter 23. In Deuteronomy chapter 23, we have a section that in many of our Bibles is just called miscellaneous laws. This is the title that gets attached to things when we're not quite sure how these words all fit together. But I think all of these words found in Deuteronomy chapter 23 are actually all implications of this one principle, no stealing. Let's take a look at the first one. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 15 and 16. You shall not give up to his master a slave who has escaped from his master to you. He shall dwell with you in your midst, in the place that he shall choose within one of your towns, wherever it suits him. You shall not wrong him. Notice what's happening here. In verses 15 and 16, runaway slaves, their rights are being protected. Probably this involves fugitives from other nations outside of Israel. It's not runaway slaves from within Israel itself. And so the idea that some foreign slave may run to Israel for some sort of protection, this is not a crazy idea. But what is crazy is the treatment that slave then receives. The Israelites cannot hand them back over to their masters. They cannot collect a reward by receiving from their masters some sort of reward for capturing the slave. What's more, they have to allow the slave to go wherever they want and then set up their homes there within the land. This lets them live in the land without fear. Of course, only a worldview that is formed by a word like do not steal would allow someone to hear and obey this word. Also, as we move on, chapter 23, verses 17 and 18 says this. None of the daughters of Israel shall be a cult prostitute, and none of the sons of Israel shall be a cult prostitute. You shall not bring the fee of a prostitute or the wages of a dog into the house of the Lord your God in payment for any vow, for both of these are an abomination to the Lord your God. Verses 17 and 18 then all detail the wages of prostitution and what you are supposed to do with this. Don't pay your vows to Yahweh with prostitution's wages. I think the idea here is that God considers this to be ill-gotten gain, and so it's stolen goods. He doesn't want it. Also, continuing on this subject of stealing, verses 19 and 20. You shall not charge interest on loans to your brother, interest on money, on food, interest on anything that is lent for interest. You may charge a foreigner interest, but you might not charge your brother interest, that the Lord your God may bless you in all that you undertake in the land, and that you are entering to take possession of it. The idea here is that they are not supposed to take interest from their brothers. So verses 19 and 20 explain that this procedure of just collecting interest on a loan that you've given, even that is forbidden. God is creating a culture where the free giving and receiving of wealth is demanded from all who belong to this community. Next, chapter 23, verses 21 to 23 say this: If you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay fulfilling it, for the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and you will be guilty of sin. But if you refrain from vowing, you will not be guilty of sin. You shall be careful to do what has passed your lips, for you have voluntarily vowed to the Lord your God what you have promised with your mouth. This talks about vows again, just like it talked about a few verses before. However, this talks about fulfilling your vows quickly. If you've promised something, don't act like you haven't. Don't let a lot of time go by, because in a way, that's like stealing. So do what you said you would do. Pay back the vows. And then finally, verses 24 through 25. If you go into your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat your fill of grapes, as many as you wish, but you shall not put any in your bag. If you go into your neighbor's standing grain, you may pluck the ears with your hand, but you shall not put a sickle to your neighbor's standing grain. So notice what's happening here in verses 24 and 25. Living in an agricultural society, the people are given some instructions about what they are supposed to do when they enter into someone else's field or vineyard. They can eat some of it, but they may not take some and hoard it for themselves for later. Now, what is the thread that runs through all of these, all of the items in this list? In my opinion, all of these seem to represent gray areas of life. These are areas where the whole idea, do not steal, becomes just a little bit fuzzy, right? What if a runaway slave shows up at the city gate? Okay, I know I'm not supposed to steal, but what happens if they just show up at the city gate and I know if I would just capture them and hand them over to their master, who's going to show up not too many days later, I could collect a handsome reward. What if I'm willing to borrow to my neighbor? Is it really that wrong to just get some interest back from him in the process? Or what if I just want to eat some of the crop alongside the edge of my neighbor's field? Surely that's fine, right? Well, maybe I could just bring a bag and make sure I save some for later. This isn't stealing, right? I should be entitled to all of these things. But this is how it works. In all of these sort of gray areas of life, God is pushing us to think about an underlying philosophy. God is enough, and I should take actions to make sure that I am not even approaching this idea of stealing from someone else. I don't have to take from others in order to protect my future because I trust my future to God. Notice the principle then. Do not allow your heart to become so greedy that it leads you to take advantage of your neighbor. You are to care for the person above all else, not money, not material gain, so that humanity trumps profit every single time. In many ways, then, I think this word in the book of Deuteronomy is another way that God is urging the people to leave behind a culture of acquisition, one that they really became all too familiar with when they were slaves in the land of Egypt. There, as you read the story, Pharaoh is insatiable. He did not hesitate to steal the Israelites' lives in order that he might gain more for himself. I mean, just read Exodus chapter 5. It's crazy. Pharaoh is all about the bricks, more bricks, more bricks, more bricks. Now, God would have the people adopt a new perspective, right? In God's new world, the manipulation of Pharaoh has been broken. His production schedule has been permanently interrupted, right? The Israelites are truly free. And once they are placed in positions of authority, here's the important piece. Once they are placed into positions of authority, just like Pharaoh was, they have to safeguard against falling into the same system again. Walter Brueggemann reminds us, he says, remember that the pattern of coercion has been broken. Do you, when you wake up in the night, remember what you were supposed to have done, vexed that you did not meet expectations? Do you fall asleep counting bricks? Do you dream of more bricks you have to make yet, or of bricks you have made that were flawed? We dream so because we have forgotten the Exodus. And so, what would it look like for us, brothers and sisters, to actually start to live this out, to shema this word in our lives today? Well, I think we could start with just this. Don't steal. That's hopeful. But beyond that, I think really we can just think through this list in Deuteronomy chapter 23. Do we ever try to take advantage of people who are foreigners in our land? Do we exploit them? Do we exploit their plight in order to make a profit for ourselves? Or how about the verses about paying our vows with prostitution money? Surely we aren't really tempted to tithe with money we made selling our bodies, but there is a sense here in which it matters how money is made. Is our acceptance of money gained through shady business dealings or even through illicit means, is that a form of stealing? God cares where our money comes from. What about interest? Verses 19 and 20 there. Well, maybe it's just helpful for us to read and to meditate on these texts. When I help someone out, am I expecting to get a cut in return? We have to watch out. That greed does not become a motivating factor for us as we lend money out. How about delaying to do what we said we would do? Are we willing to make a commitment? I mean, if we actually say it, then we need to make sure that we fulfill it quickly. Maybe our delay in doing what we said we would do is sort of a way of stealing from others' trust in our word. And finally, how do we feel about sharing our resources with those who are around us? Maybe we don't have vineyards or fields for people to come and enjoy from, but surely there are ways we could use the resources that God has given us as a way to bless others. We may feel offended sometimes when someone benefits from our blessing, but in those moments, perhaps we can just step back and realize, God really has given us plenty. Sometimes the Bible can be pretty black and white. Don't steal. But other times, our lives present us with so many gray areas. How do we live in the midst of so much gray? Maybe it's by trusting God's provision and providence. Maybe by refusing to collect things or hoard things, and in so doing, create a disadvantage for others. Instead, I think really the book of Deuteronomy would push us to a place where we trust God's provision for us. As the people of God, we stand firm on his word, and we trust in a God who is always enough.